Nobody expected America's nicest late-night host to turn vicious on live television. Jimmy Fallon's fake smile spread across his face as he prepared to humiliate Dua Lipa in front of 3 million viewers. "Dua, let's be honest, you're just another pop star who got lucky with a catchy beat," he said with uncharacteristic cruelty. But what the Albanian British singer did next would not only destroy Fallon's reputation, it would change late-night television forever. If you want to see how an international pop star exposed America's most beloved talk show host, watch this entire story and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking confrontations that the entertainment industry tried to bury. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon's studio hummed with its usual pre-show energy that Tuesday evening in May 2025. Jimmy Fallon, at 50, had spent over a decade building his reputation as America's most wholesome and enthusiastic late-night host. His boyish charm, infectious laughter, and seemingly genuine excitement about every guest had made him the undisputed king of late-night television, consistently beating his competitors in ratings and advertiser appeal. Since taking over The Tonight Show in 2014, Fallon had revolutionized late-night television by abandoning the traditional confrontational interview style that had defined the genre for decades. Instead of political commentary or sharp-edged humor, he offered viewers a safe space filled with silly games, musical collaborations, and cheerful celebrity interactions. His approach had generated billions in advertising revenue for NBC, while making him one of the most recognizable faces in American entertainment. The transformation from beloved comedian to late-night host had come with unexpected pressures that few people understood. Fallon's Saturday Night Live background had prepared him for sketch comedy and impressions, but the nightly grind of hosting a talk show required different skills. Industry veterans noted that he had become increasingly defensive about his position as America's favorite host, particularly as streaming services and social media began fragmenting traditional television audiences. But behind the cameras, industry insiders whispered about a different Jimmy Fallon. Former staff members, speaking anonymously to entertainment blogs like The Hollywood Reporter and Variety, described a host who could be petty, controlling, and surprisingly cruel when cameras weren't rolling. Several celebrities had privately complained about his condescending attitude toward international artists, particularly those who didn't fit his narrow definition of American entertainment success. Multiple sources within NBC had reported that Fallon struggled with the perception that his show lacked the intellectual credibility of competitors like Stephen Colbert's political commentary or the edgy humor of Jimmy Kimmel's more provocative interviews. Focus groups consistently showed that while audiences enjoyed Fallon's entertainment value, they questioned whether he possessed the depth and authenticity of other late-night hosts. The pressure to maintain his cheerful public persona while dealing with private insecurities had created a psychological strain that was beginning to affect his professional judgment. Internal NBC documents, later leaked to the New York Times, revealed that network consultants had suggested Fallon needed more edge and authenticity to compete with hosts who had gained significant cultural relevance through their willingness to tackle controversial topics. Dua Lipa, at 29, represented everything Fallon secretly resented about modern pop music and entertainment. The Albanian British singer had built a massive global empire without conforming to traditional American entertainment industry expectations or seeking approval from established gatekeepers. Her journey from London coffee shops to international superstardom had bypassed the usual American industry checkpoints that typically determined mainstream success. Born to Albanian parents who had fled Kosovo during the Yugoslav wars, Dua Lipa's family had struggled financially during her childhood in London. Her father, Dukagjan Lipa, was a rock musician who had been forced to work multiple jobs to support his family while pursuing his musical dreams. This background had instilled in Dua a work ethic and determination that would later fuel her meteoric rise to global stardom. Her 3 Grammy Awards, billions of streams, and sold-out world tours had been achieved largely through international success that eventually forced American recognition rather than seeking approval from traditional industry gatekeepers. Unlike many pop stars who built their careers through American talent shows or record label development programs, Dua Lipa had created her own path through relentless touring, strategic social media engagement, and collaboration with forward-thinking producers who recognized her unique artistic vision. The music industry's initial rejection of Dua Lipa had been rooted in outdated assumptions about what American audiences would accept. Her blend of Albanian cultural influences, British pop sensibilities, and contemporary dance music didn't fit neatly into established marketing categories. Record executives had struggled to understand how to position an artist whose identity transcended simple national or cultural boundaries. The booking of Dua Lipa for The Tonight Show had been routine. She was promoting her latest album Radical Optimism, and preparing for a massive North American tour that would include sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden, the Hollywood Bowl, and dozens of arenas across the continent. Her publicist had specifically requested the appearance because Fallon's show was considered the gold standard for respectful celebrity interviews that could reach mainstream American audiences. What nobody anticipated was that Fallon was in the midst of a personal and professional crisis that would transform his usual performance into something much darker and more destructive. NBC executives had been pressuring him about declining ratings among younger demographics, particularly the 18 to 34 age group that advertisers valued most highly. Streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube were drawing audiences away from traditional late-night television, and focus groups indicated that viewers found Fallon's perpetually upbeat persona increasingly inauthentic in an era of social and political upheaval. Additionally, Fallon was dealing with personal struggles that had remained hidden from public view. Sources close to the production revealed that he had been undergoing intensive therapy to address long-standing issues with anxiety and perfectionism that had been exacerbated by the demands of hosting a nightly television show. The pressure to maintain his cheerful public persona while dealing with private struggles had created a psychological strain that was beginning to affect his professional judgment. That Tuesday evening, as Dua Lipa prepared backstage in her designated dressing room, she had no idea she was about to encounter a host desperate to prove he could be more than just America's nice guy. Fallon's pre-show meeting with his writing team and producers had revealed his strategy. Instead of his usual fawning celebrity treatment, he would position himself as the arbiter of legitimate American entertainment, subtly undermining international artists who he felt hadn't earned their success through traditional industry channels. Americans are tired of being told what music to like by streaming algorithms, Fallon had told his writing team during rehearsal. Maybe it's time someone called out these manufactured pop stars who think a few viral songs make them real artists. We need to remind people what authentic American entertainment looks like. The statement revealed the depth of his cultural bias and his fundamental misunderstanding of how modern music creation and distribution actually worked. His writers, many of whom were younger and more culturally aware, had exchanged uncomfortable glances during the meeting, but none felt positioned to challenge their boss's increasingly erratic behavior. The studio audience was packed with Tonight Show regulars, tourists who had waited months for tickets, NBC Page program participants fulfilling their mandatory audience duties, and longtime fans who expected Fallon's typical warm, enthusiastic interview style. Many had come specifically to see Dua Lipa, whose massive hit Levitating had dominated American radio for months despite initial industry skepticism about her international background and unconventional artistic approach. The audience demographic was notably diverse, reflecting Dua Lipa's broad appeal across age groups, ethnicities, and cultural backgrounds. Young Albanian Americans, British expatriates, and second-generation immigrants were particularly well represented, many wearing clothing or accessories that celebrated their cultural heritage while expressing their admiration for an artist who had achieved mainstream success without abandoning her multicultural identity. As Dua Lipa took the stage, she looked elegant and confident in a striking black designer outfit that reflected her sophisticated understanding of fashion as cultural expression. Her distinctive style had made her a regular fixture at fashion weeks in Paris, Milan, and New York, and her clothing choices consistently sparked discussions about the intersection of music, fashion, and cultural identity in contemporary entertainment. She had appeared on dozens of talk shows worldwide and was known for her articulate, thoughtful interview style and her ability to discuss complex topics about music, culture, social issues, and the challenges facing international artists in an increasingly globalized entertainment landscape. Her media training had been extensive, but it had focused primarily on handling standard celebrity interview questions rather than preparing for the kind of hostile interrogation she was about to face. Fallon's entrance was met with the usual thunderous applause, but seasoned Tonight Show observers noticed something different in his demeanor. His smile seemed forced rather than genuine, and his typical bouncing energy appeared more manic than enthusiastic. The band's musical introduction seemed to energize him temporarily, but as he settled behind his desk, facing Dua Lipa, the atmosphere felt subtly hostile despite the audience's continued enthusiasm. His opening monologue had been unusually sharp, featuring several jokes about foreign influences in American entertainment that had confused audience members who were accustomed to his typically inclusive humor. The writing team had been uncomfortable with the material, but Fallon had insisted on including references to authentic American talent versus imported entertainment products. Dua Lipa, everyone. Fallon announced with his trademark enthusiasm, but his tone carried an undertone that suggested mockery rather than celebration. The pop star who's conquered, well, everywhere except here until recently. Welcome to America, I guess. The comment was subtle enough that the audience laughed, assuming it was typical Fallon playfulness, but Dua Lipa's expression showed she recognized the implicit criticism, that her American success was somehow less legitimate than homegrown talent, or that she was an outsider who had somehow infiltrated American entertainment rather than earning her place through merit. "Jimmy, thank you for having me," she replied graciously, her British accent adding an elegant formality to her response. "I'm excited to be here and to talk about the new album and the upcoming tour. American audiences have been incredibly welcoming." Her diplomatic response was designed to deflect any potential hostility while emphasizing the positive reception she had received from American fans, subtly countering Fallon's suggestion that she was somehow foreign to American entertainment culture. Fallon leaned back in his chair with his familiar casual pose, but his next words would mark the beginning of one of the most uncomfortable and ultimately destructive interviews in late-night television history. "So Dua, let's talk about your journey. You've had some hits, some viral moments on TikTok, and now you're doing the whole international pop star thing. But I have to ask, and I think Americans want to know, what makes you different from all the other pretty girls singing over electronic beats?" The question was devastating in its casual cruelty and revealed multiple layers of bias and hostility. Fallon had essentially dismissed her entire career as nothing more than manufactured pop while reducing her to a pretty girl, rather than acknowledging her as a serious artist with legitimate creative contributions. The reference to electronic beats carried an implicit criticism of contemporary production techniques, while suggesting that her music was somehow less authentic than traditional instrumentation. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something was wrong with their usually supportive host. Several international audience members looked genuinely hurt by the casual dismissal of Dua Lipa's achievements, while others seemed confused by Fallon's uncharacteristically hostile approach to a guest who had done nothing to provoke such treatment. Dua Lipa maintained her composure, though her slight pause indicated she was processing the unexpected attack and recalibrating her approach to an interview that had suddenly become adversarial. "Well, Jimmy, I think music is universal. I've been writing and performing since I was a teenager, working with incredible producers and songwriters to create songs that connect with people regardless of where they're from." Her response was measured and professional, emphasizing the collaborative and inclusive nature of music creation while subtly pushing back against the nationalist undertones of Fallon's question. She was clearly trying to steer the conversation toward her artistic process and achievements, rather than engaging with his attempts to diminish her legitimacy. Fallon's laugh was sharp and dismissive, lacking any of the warmth that typically characterized his interactions with guests. "Writing and performing, sure. But let's be honest, Dua. You didn't write Levitating alone, did you? In fact, looking at your credits, most of your hits have teams of writers. That's not really the same as artists like Taylor Swift or Beyoncé who actually craft their own music." The comparison was particularly cruel and strategically designed to undermine Dua Lipa's credibility, while positioning established American artists as superior. Fallon was ignoring the collaborative nature of most contemporary music production while setting up a false equivalency that suggested American artists were more authentic because of their perceived independence, despite the fact that both Taylor Swift and Beyoncé regularly worked with teams of writers and producers. Several audience members were now visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the interview, and some began exchanging concerned glances as they realized this wasn't typical Tonight Show banter, but something much more hostile and personal. "Jimmy, I think there might be some misunderstanding about how modern music production works," Dua Lipa replied, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious hostility. "Collaboration has always been part of music creation. Even the Beatles worked closely with producer George Martin, who was often called the fifth Beatle. What matters is the creative vision, artistic direction, and emotional authenticity of the final product." Her reference to the Beatles was strategically brilliant, invoking one of the most respected and culturally significant musical acts in history to demonstrate that collaboration enhanced rather than diminished artistic legitimacy. She was also subtly educating the audience about music production realities, while maintaining her dignity under attack. Fallon's response revealed the depth of his planned assault and his determination to damage her reputation regardless of facts or fairness. "Creative vision? Dua, come on. You're managed by the same company that handles a dozen other pop stars. Your sound is focus grouped and market tested. You're basically a product being sold to teenagers who don't know what real music sounds like." The attack was now fully personal and revealed Fallon's contempt not just for Dua Lipa but for her fans, whom he was characterizing as naive and easily manipulated. His use of product was particularly dehumanizing, suggesting that she was nothing more than a manufactured commodity rather than a human being with artistic integrity and creative agency. The studio fell uncomfortably silent as audience members began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented and deeply wrong. This wasn't playful talk show banter. This was a character assassination disguised as an interview, and many people were beginning to feel complicit in something that violated their expectations of entertainment and human decency. Dua Lipa realized she was facing something she had never encountered before, a major American media figure attempting to destroy her credibility on live television, using his platform and authority to humiliate her in front of millions of viewers. The attack was so unexpected and so vicious that it took her a moment to fully process what was happening and formulate an appropriate response. But what happened next would transform the entire trajectory of the interview and ultimately Fallon's career, as Dua Lipa drew upon resources and preparation that Fallon had never anticipated. Dua Lipa smiled calmly and reached into her purse, pulling out a leather portfolio that she placed deliberately on Fallon's desk. The move was confident and purposeful, suggesting that she had come prepared for various contingencies, including the possibility of hostile questioning. "Jimmy, I understand your perspective, but I think you might be interested in seeing something that could provide some context for this conversation." Fallon's confident smirk faltered slightly as he realized his guest wasn't crumbling under pressure as he had expected. His experience had taught him that most celebrities, when faced with unexpected hostility, would become defensive, emotional, or would simply try to deflect and move on to safer topics. "What's this, sheet music to prove you're a real artist?" he asked with continued sarcasm, but his tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty as he began to sense that he might have underestimated his opponent. "Actually," Dua Lipa replied, opening the portfolio with practiced confidence, "this is documentation of my songwriting credits, production involvement, and creative control over my music. But more importantly, it's evidence of something I think you and your audience should know about how the American music industry actually operates." She pulled out a stack of professionally organized documents and handed them to Fallon with the calm authority of someone who had anticipated this moment and prepared thoroughly for it. "These are contracts and communication records between my team and various American record labels from early in my career, before I achieved international success." Fallon glanced at the papers, his expression becoming confused and slightly concerned as he tried to understand what he was looking at and how it might relate to the interview he thought he was controlling. "What you're holding," Dua Lipa continued, her voice gaining strength and authority, "are rejection letters from every major American record label. Capitol Records, Atlantic Records, Columbia Records, RCA Records, all of them passed on signing me when I was starting out. The consensus was that American audiences wouldn't accept a British Albanian artist making the kind of music I wanted to create." The revelation began to shift the power dynamic in the studio as audience members realized they were witnessing something much more significant than a typical celebrity interview. This was becoming a real-time education about industry bias and cultural gatekeeping. "But here's what's particularly interesting," Dua Lipa continued, pulling out additional documents with the confidence of someone delivering a carefully prepared presentation. "These are internal emails and meeting notes from those same labels from last year, desperately trying to sign me or poach me from my current label after my international success made me unavoidable in the American market." She handed him printouts of email exchanges that showed record executives who had previously dismissed her now offering massive contracts and promising unlimited creative control if she would switch labels. Fallon was now visibly uncomfortable, realizing that his attack on her legitimacy was backfiring spectacularly, and that she had somehow obtained documentation that completely undermined his narrative about her being a manufactured product of the American entertainment machine. "Jimmy, you asked about authenticity and real artistry," Dua Lipa said, her tone becoming more confident as she sensed the momentum shifting in her favor. "Let me tell you what authenticity actually looks like in practice. Authenticity is continuing to create music you believe in even when an entire industry tells you it's not good enough for their market. Authenticity is building a global fan base through the quality of your work rather than through industry connections or gatekeeping systems." She pulled out her phone and connected it to the studio's screen system with the expertise of someone who had done this before. "This is streaming data from my music platforms over the past 3 years. I want to show you something that I think illustrates what authentic success actually looks like." The screen displayed complex analytics showing her music's performance across different countries, demographics, and platforms. The data was remarkable and told a compelling story about organic growth and genuine fan engagement. "My music gained popularity in 47 countries before American radio would even play it," Dua Lipa continued, pointing to specific data points that showed her international success preceding American recognition. Young people around the world were connecting with songs that the American music industry had dismissed as unmarketable. This wasn't manufactured success. This was organic fan engagement driving demand that eventually forced industry recognition. The data visualization was powerful and undeniable, showing sustained growth patterns that indicated genuine artistic connection rather than promotional manipulation. Audience members were now completely engaged, realizing they were receiving an education about how modern music success actually worked versus industry mythology. Fallon attempted to regain control of the interview and salvage his attack. "That's great, Dua, but streaming numbers don't necessarily indicate artistic quality. McDonald's is popular worldwide, but that doesn't make it gourmet food." The comparison was another attempt to diminish her achievements by suggesting that popularity and quality were mutually exclusive, but Dua Lipa was ready with a response that would destroy his argument completely and expose the intellectual weakness of his position. "You're absolutely right, Jimmy. Popularity doesn't equal quality, which is exactly why I came prepared to discuss both." She clicked to a new screen displaying critical reviews, industry recognition, and professional acknowledgments. 3 Grammy Awards, 5 Brit Awards, multiple Ivor Novello Awards for songwriting excellence, recognition from songwriting organizations, music critics, and industry professionals worldwide. The credentials were displayed professionally and were undeniably impressive, representing recognition from the most prestigious institutions in the music industry. But Dua Lipa wasn't finished with her systematic demolition of Fallon's attack. "But since you mentioned authenticity and American standards," she continued, "let me ask you something that I think gets to the heart of this conversation. How many songs have you written, Jimmy?" The question hung in the air like a perfectly placed trap. Fallon, who had built his career on entertainment and comedy rather than musical creation, had no answer to a question that exposed the fundamental flaw in his entire attack. "I'm not a musician," he replied defensively. "I'm a television host." "Exactly," Dua Lipa replied with devastating simplicity. "So what qualifies you to determine who is or isn't a legitimate artist? What gives you the authority to dismiss the work of professional musicians, producers, and songwriters?" The question struck at the heart of Fallon's entire attack and exposed it as nothing more than uninformed bias dressed up as cultural criticism. He had positioned himself as an authority on musical authenticity while having no actual musical credentials, experience, or expertise himself. Furthermore, Dua Lipa continued, sensing her advantage and pressing it expertly, "Since we're having an honest conversation about authenticity in entertainment, let's talk about your show. Do you write your own monologue jokes?" Fallon's face went pale as he realized she was turning his own criticism back on him. Late-night television was notoriously dependent on writing teams, and everyone in the industry knew that hosts rarely wrote their own material, despite often taking sole credit for the content. "That's different," he stammered, his confidence completely shattered. "Television is a collaborative medium. Everyone knows that hosts work with writing teams." "Exactly like music production," Dua Lipa replied with a slight smile that conveyed both victory and restraint. "Collaboration doesn't diminish authenticity, it enhances creativity and allows for better final products. The difference is that I acknowledge my collaborators and share credit openly in every song's credits, while you've spent the last 10 minutes claiming that collaboration somehow makes my work less legitimate." The parallel was perfect and intellectually devastating. She had used his own industry's practices to demonstrate the hypocrisy of his attack while maintaining her dignity and professionalism throughout the exchange. The audience was now completely engaged, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented, a guest systematically dismantling a host's credibility on live television using facts, logic, and evidence rather than emotion or personal attacks. But Dua Lipa wasn't finished. She had one more piece of evidence that would deliver the final blow to Fallon's attack and transform the conversation from a defense of her work to an expose of his character. "Jimmy, since you're so concerned about authenticity in American entertainment, I thought you might be interested in something that speaks directly to your point about crediting collaborative work." She handed him a legal document that she had clearly prepared specifically for this moment. "This is a lawsuit filed by 3 former Tonight Show writers claiming you consistently took credit for material you didn't create and failed to provide proper attribution for their collaborative work." Fallon's face went white as he recognized the document. The lawsuit had been quietly settled out of court with significant financial payments and non-disclosure agreements, but Dua Lipa had somehow obtained details about the case through her research. The irony, Dua Lipa continued with devastating precision, is that you're criticizing me for transparent collaborative music creation while you've allegedly been taking sole credit for collaborative television creation without acknowledging your collaborators' contributions. The revelation was explosive and completely transformed the power dynamic in the studio. Audience members were now seeing their beloved host in an entirely different light, as someone who had potentially exploited and stolen credit from his own employees. The studio was now completely silent except for the hum of cameras capturing what would become the most replayed and analyzed moment in late-night television history. "But here's what really bothers me about this entire conversation, Jimmy," Dua Lipa said, her tone becoming more serious as she prepared to deliver her most important point. "You've spent this entire interview trying to diminish my accomplishments, not because they lack merit, but because they challenge your preconceptions about what American success should look like and who deserves to achieve it." She clicked to a final slide on the screen that would deliver her most powerful argument. "This is fan mail I've received from young Albanian American, British American, and immigrant families who found inspiration in seeing someone like them achieve success without abandoning their cultural identity or conforming to narrow industry expectations." The images were powerful and emotionally compelling. Handwritten letters from teenagers and young adults expressing gratitude for representation they had never seen before in mainstream American entertainment. The letters described feelings of validation, inspiration, and cultural pride that came from seeing someone who shared their background succeeding on a global stage. Authenticity isn't about conforming to existing industry standards or seeking approval from traditional gatekeepers, Dua Lipa concluded with quiet authority. It's about creating something genuine that connects with people's experiences and expands possibilities for others. And sometimes, the most authentic thing you can do is succeed on your own terms rather than seeking validation from people who profit from maintaining exclusivity. Fallon was completely speechless, his planned character assassination having been turned into a masterclass on artistic integrity, cultural representation, and authentic success. The audience, initially confused by his hostility, was now applauding Dua Lipa's response with genuine enthusiasm and respect. The interview concluded with Fallon's typical musical performance segment, but the damage to his reputation was complete and irreversible. Dua Lipa performed her new single with such confidence, skill, and emotional depth that it only reinforced everything she had said about her artistic capabilities and authentic creative vision. Within minutes of the show's conclusion, clips of the confrontation were viral across all social media platforms. #Dua destroys Jimmy, #Fallon exposed, and #authenticity matters trended globally as viewers shared their shock at seeing the beloved host exposed as petty, mean-spirited, and intellectually dishonest. The reaction was swift, widespread, and devastating for both Fallon and NBC. Former guests began coming forward with stories of similar off-camera hostility and cultural insensitivity. Writers and staff members leaked additional information about Fallon's treatment of international artists, his pattern of taking credit for others' work, and his increasingly erratic behavior behind the scenes. 3 days after the broadcast, NBC announced that The Tonight Show would be taking a brief hiatus to address production concerns. Industry insiders recognized this as an admission that Fallon's behavior had created a crisis requiring immediate intervention. Fallon eventually returned to television after a month-long hiatus, but his show had been fundamentally restructured. New protocols were implemented for guest treatment, writing attribution, and cultural sensitivity. His first episode back included a formal apology to Dua Lipa and a commitment to learning and growth. The confrontation became a turning point for late-night television and entertainment media more broadly. The lesson resonated throughout the industry. True authority comes not from the power to exclude or diminish others, but from the wisdom to recognize and celebrate excellence regardless of its origin.